Hi guys, welcome back to online science week 2. This is crazy, but we are happy to have at least this. So, hey, do you see these questions? 1, 2, 3, 3. I'm sure Hayden sees. Oh no, it's Murphy that always catches my mistakes. Murphy, I hope you see that mistake there. I hope you remember what we did last week. We were working on the nervous system. We're going to continue on the nervous system this week. And I want you to remember what the nervous system does, what neurons are, what motor neurons are, and what sensory neurons are. So you probably remember that the nervous system gathers and interprets information about the body's internal and external environment, and it responds to that information. Remember, sense and respond to change. That's one of the characteristics of living things. And it's our nervous system that is one of the primary ways that we sense and respond to change. Now, you also need to remember what neurons are. Neurons are those nerve cells, those really cool nerve cells. And they come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes, but they all have those different parts. They have those dendrites, and the dendrites are those little branches that receive signals. And then they have the cell body where the nucleus is and where it does all the endoplasmic reticulum and all the mitochondria and all that kind of stuff. And then they have this axon that can be really long, sometimes up to 1 meter long. And that axon sends the cell sends an electrical signal down that axon to the axon terminals. The axon terminals release neurotransmitters, they release chemicals, they release those molecules that get picked up by that next neuron, by the next dendrites. And those chemicals, those neurotransmitters that get picked up, they pass that signal along. Okay, so this is how messages get sent throughout your body. They get sent from your eyes out to your hands so you can quickly catch that ruler as you tried last week. Now, you probably also remember there are multiple types of neurons, and 2 main ones are sensory neurons and motor neurons. Now, the motor neurons cause the movement. It's a message that gets sent from the central nervous system out to the peripheral nervous system to allow movement. Close that hand, catch that ruler. Then there's also sensory neurons, and the sensory neurons collect that information. They tell you, ow, that hurt. That message got picked up by the sensory neurons, got sent in. You put your hand on a hot stove, your sensory neurons pick up that information. They send it to your central nervous system. Your central nervous system says, uh-oh, not a good thing, sends a message out, back out with the motor neurons, and those motor neurons cause the response to move that off. So these neurons work together to get the job done. So sensory neurons gather information, send it to the central nervous system, and these sensory neurons, these form our senses, and that's what we're going to work on this week, and it's so cool. So first off, you know the senses. We all think of sight and hearing and taste and smell and touch as our senses. And those are very important senses. We also have lots of other ones that we don't think about. Our sense of balance. How can we stand up on a rocking boat? Even with our eyes closed, we can stand up. Temperature. We know when it's warm, when it's cold. Proprioception. Very interesting. That's what allows us to, sort of feel where our body is, even when we aren't looking. Oh, the sense of pain. We know that all too well. We even have a sense of time. Really cool stuff. There's actually tons of different internal senses, things that we aren't even aware of, and there's hunger is a sense, and blushing. Ooh, we have different senses in our skin that we don't spend a whole lot of time thinking about. Acid reflux is a sense. Think of those things that happen in your digestive system. Anyways, we're going to keep moving on. We have lots of sensory neurons throughout our bodies, but by far, the most of those sensory neurons are found in the eyes. And that's what we're going to spend today on. About 70% of all the sensory receptors in the body are specialized photosensitive cells in the eyes. So we are a very, very visual organism. We rely on that a lot. And these eyes are just amazing. We're going to learn a little bit about them today. It's been estimated, as it says down there, that 1/3 of all the fibers bringing impulses to the central nervous system come from the eyes. So we collect lots and lots of information visually. So let's learn a little bit about this. So some eye biology basics. Yes, eyes, they're so cool. So you might have your note sheet, and you might want to be filling in your note sheet or taking some notes here. The first thing you want to know about is what photoreceptors are. Photoreceptors are these sensory neurons. Photo means light, receptor. It receives that light and it responds to it. It's a sensory neuron that absorbs light energy. It absorbs that light, it converts that light into an electrical impulse that's sent down the axon, and then the axon terminals release some chemicals, and that's how we sense when there is light. So, first off, there are many organisms that are photosensitive. Photosensitive means that they detect light. Plants detect light. You can see them leaning over towards light. Sea stars have those cool little arms there. They also detect light. Little flatworms, and even our little things like Euglena, things that are single-celled organisms, can be photosensitive. But we have our eyeball, which is more than photosensitive. Our eye actually is an organ for focusing light, and we're going to look at how that eye works today. Okay, so first off, there are two types of photoreceptors. You may have heard about these before in the eye, and we're going to learn about what the retina is. But in the eye, there's two types of photoreceptors. There's these things called rods and these things called cones. Rods are very good at detecting dim light. Now, they work in basically shades of gray, black and white. So, a nocturnal organism, when the lights are really dim, will want lots of rods to be able to see in the dim light. When you are looking around at night when there's not bright light, you'll probably notice that you can't tell colors very well. You might go up to the wrong car thinking that's your car because you can't really tell the difference between, a green car and a blue car. When there's no light, you really can't tell that difference because you're using your rods. Cones, on the other hand, detect color, but they demand really bright light, and they don't work if there's not really bright light, so you don't see color when there's not bright light. Now, some organisms have both rods and cones. Some have mostly rods. If they're nocturnal, they're going to have mostly rods. Okay, we have some of each. Now, let's first off really understand this eye. So we're going to be studying the eyeball today and the organ of how this little eye works. I wish I could pop mine right out and show it to you. But here we are looking at a cross section of that eye. Now, what we're going to do is learn about these different parts and how this works. But the first thing you got to understand is how light works. So when there is no light, you cannot see. And when I mean no light, I mean no light. When there's no light, you cannot see. When there's a little bit of light, you can see because your rods can pick up that little bit of light. But if there's no light, you can't see, period. Because the way that you see is light bounces off things. Now, the sun or any kind of light is a source of light, and it's shooting its light down. These little photons are coming down. Those little photons, you can almost think of them as little tiny balls, and they come down and they bounce off things. And they bounce off and they go in multiple directions, but the ones that bounce off and go into your eye, they allow you to see. Now, if you put something in the way so that those photons would bounce off and not get into your eye, then you would not see that. And that's why if you put your hand in front of your face, you don't see anything beyond that because that light does not get into your eye. But when you do see something, the light comes down, it bounces off, and it goes into your eye. And there's more light that bounces off down here off their elbow and it goes into your eye. And then there's some light that bounces off and goes over here, and it lets somebody over there see who they are. But that light has to bounce around. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at inside what the light does inside this eye and try to make sense of that. So first off, that light goes in through, you can see it here, that very outer layer. Now, some of you touch that sometimes. Yuck. I would never do that. But at least you don't want to. Certainly not now, because that's a big way of getting viruses in your body. But that outer layer is called the cornea. Now, if you wear contact lenses, you cover that cornea over with a lens, but most of us don't ever touch that thing. So the light is first going to go through that cornea. Now, we're going to go in and we're going to see this a little bit differently in this one. So light, it's bouncing off an object, and the light that's being seen goes into the eye. Now I'm going to try to get a pen going. Now, the first thing that light has to do is it has to pass through this cornea, right? And that cornea is that little layer. Behind that cornea is this liquid layer, and we're not going to worry about that too much. but then the light would go through the pupil. Now the pupil, we all think we know of that pupil as that dark spot. What's really kind of cool is that pupil is really, it's really a nothing. It's a door. It's an opening. The pupil is the opening to the back of the eye. There's this shade in front of the pupil, and that's called the iris. And this iris, that's the part, I don't know, what color eyes should this person have? We're going to give this person green eyes. Let's say this iris was green, then this iris would make them look like they have green eyes. And that iris is a shade, okay? And it can change. It has muscles attached to it, and it can get bigger or smaller, and therefore it can make that pupil bigger or smaller. But that pupil is going to be some size, and that pupil is an opening, so that light gets into the eye through that pupil. Right behind that pupil is the lens. Now the lens actually focuses that light, so it brings a bunch of different light together, and it sort of focuses it, and that's kind of tricky, but you might look that up. And then that light passes through this liquid layer, this vitreous gel again. It's basically a watery layer, and it hits the back of the eye. Now, if you think of the eye being like a ball, right? And so you're on the inside of that ball. You open up a tennis ball, and there's that inside layer back there. Well, that inside layer on the very back is called the retina. And this retina is the super important part, because it's the retina that has all those photoreceptors. So on the retina, hitting the retina, there's lots and lots of photoreceptors. That's where the rods and cones are. Those rods and cones are stimulated by that light. Those photoreceptors then make an electrical signal. They send it down along their axon. It goes out through all the different axons here, which is really, really interesting. All these different photoreceptors, their axons go right out here through this optic nerve. So all these photoreceptors have all these nerves that are going out here, all these axons that are going out here through this optic nerve, which is very, very interesting. Okay, so, oh boy, we got to keep going here. So here's the basic structure of the eye, and you'll see here's those different parts. So the light is going in, it's going through the cornea, it's going through the pupil, it's going through the lens, it's hitting this back retina. Now, this back retina has these different spots to it. There's this thing called the fovea, and the fovea is where the photoreceptors are most densely packed. They're super, super packed in there, and so that's where your best vision is. And if you think of trying to read something, if that light isn't hitting the center of your eye, you can't read it. You might be able to see it, but you can't read it. So if you want to really read something, you put it right in front so that the light bounces right into the center of that eye where that fovea is, and that's where you'll get that stuff in focus. In fact, if you wanted to be able to read, you can read small stuff that's on the fovea, but it'd have to be really big if that light's hitting somewhere else on the retina to be able to read it, which is really interesting and something you should try yourself as you do it. Now, here's a picture of what that retina looks like. And you'll see there's lots of blood vessels, because these cells are very much alive, and they need all that stuff. They need that oxygen. They need all the nutrients that is coming with that blood. But what you'll also see here is that optic nerve, okay, which is really kind of cool. So the optic nerve comes out right here. I like this because this is the fovea. That's where those neurons are most densely packed, those photoreceptors. But over here is the optic nerve. Now, what's really cool about that is where the optic nerve is, there's no photoreceptors. And if there's no photoreceptors, you can't see at that spot. And that's going to lead us till tomorrow when we get to discover where our blind spot is. Okay, that's it for today. Sorry it took a little bit longer than I thought. Hope you have a good day. Answer those questions. Send it in. Bye now.